Did you know that more than 70% of the world's population lives in countries with socialist policies? Or that the gap between the rich and poor is growing faster than ever, with the world's top 1% owning more than 45% of global wealth? These numbers might shock you, but they reveal a simple truth: the fight between socialism, communism, and capitalism is more relevant today than ever before. In this video, we're going to dive deep into the differences between these powerful ideologies. You might think socialism and communism are the same, but they're not. Marxism? It's the blueprint that started it all but has often led to unexpected results. We'll break down how Marx's ideas still influence politics today, why some countries with socialist policies are thriving, and why others that tried communism ended up in chaos. By the end of this video, you'll see why these ideas still shape the world we live in, and why the debates around them are far from over. So, are these systems the key to a fairer world, or are they outdated ideas doomed to fail? Stick around as we uncover the truth behind socialism, communism, and Marxism. Chapter 1: Cracking the Code. What are socialism, communism, and Marxism? Let's start with the basics. What exactly are socialism, communism, and Marxism? These terms are often used interchangeably, but they're not the same. Socialism focuses on economic equality, aiming to reduce the gap between rich and poor. Communism, on the other hand, takes this idea further by seeking to eliminate private property altogether. Marxism is the theory that inspired both, outlining a path toward classless societies. One of the biggest misconceptions is that socialism and communism are just about government control. In reality, both are systems that envision a fairer distribution of wealth, but the methods differ. Socialism often works within democratic systems, with the government regulating industries, while communism seeks a complete overhaul of society, eliminating private property and even the state itself. Karl Marx, the father of Marxism, saw capitalism as a system built on exploitation. He believed that the working class, or proletariat, would rise up and overthrow the wealthy elite, or bourgeoisie. This would lead to a society where the government eventually fades away, and people share resources equally. While Marxism is often linked to revolution, socialism has taken many forms. For instance, Scandinavian countries like Sweden and Denmark have embraced democratic socialism, where people vote for policies that support welfare programs. These countries are often praised for their high standard of living, universal healthcare, and strong education systems. On the flip side, communism has mostly been associated with authoritarian regimes. Think of the Soviet Union, Cuba, or North Korea. These governments have used the idea of a classless society to justify central control over everything, from industry to individual freedoms. The key difference between socialism and communism lies in the role of the state. Socialism allows for government intervention and regulation, while communism seeks to abolish the state entirely once the class struggle is over. But here's an interesting fact: while communism has failed in many countries, socialist principles are still alive and well in places like Canada and the UK. These nations implement social safety nets, healthcare, education, and unemployment benefits, all rooted in socialist ideas. In the 20th century, Marxist revolutions tried to turn these theories into practice. Countries like Russia and China aimed to create a new world order, but their methods often led to dictatorships and mass poverty. This is where the theory and reality often clash. So, what about the modern world? Can socialism, communism, or Marxism still work today? Well, even though many communist regimes have collapsed, the core ideas of economic equality still inspire movements worldwide. In the US, for example, Bernie Sanders has sparked interest in democratic socialism, pushing for free healthcare and more social safety nets. Now, let's ask the big question: are these systems doomed to failure? Not necessarily. Socialism can exist peacefully in capitalist countries, as seen in Western Europe. Communism, however, struggles in practice due to the power it concentrates in the hands of the government, often leading to corruption. In short, these ideologies are complex, and their history is filled with victories and failures. But at their core, they all seek to create a society where wealth is shared more equally. Chapter 2: The Roots of Revolution. Marxism's blueprint for change. Marxism isn't just an economic theory, it's a revolutionary blueprint. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels laid it all out in the Communist Manifesto, first published in 1848. The manifesto begins with the famous line, "A spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism." It's a bold statement, and it set the tone for the radical ideas that followed. Marx argued that history is shaped by class struggles, where the oppressed eventually rise against the oppressors. In his time, this meant the working class fighting back against the wealthy bourgeoisie. Marx believed that capitalism was inherently flawed and would eventually collapse under its contradictions. What makes Marxism different from other political theories is its emphasis on historical materialism. Marx believed that economic forces drive all human development, including politics and culture. In other words, the way society organizes its economy shapes everything else, from laws to values. For Marx, the key to achieving a just society was revolution. He didn't think that workers would simply vote their way to equality. Instead, he envisioned a complete overthrow of the capitalist system. The proletariat would rise, seize control of the means of production, and establish a dictatorship of the proletariat to guide the transition. But Marx didn't just predict a revolution, he believed it was inevitable. According to him, the contradictions in capitalism would eventually lead to its downfall. For example, as businesses grow, they centralize wealth and power in fewer hands, which creates greater inequality. This, Marx thought, would fuel class conflict and lead to revolution. Interestingly, Marx also predicted that once the revolution was complete, the state would no longer be necessary. Without classes or private property, there would be no need for government. This vision of a stateless society is the ultimate goal of Marxism. But here's a fun fact: Marx was not entirely against capitalism in the short run. He acknowledged that capitalism had played a vital role in advancing human progress by developing productive forces. However, he believed it would eventually reach a point where it could no longer serve the interests of the majority. In his later work, Das Kapital, Marx examined the inner workings of capitalism. He argued that capitalism exploits workers because they create value, but only receive a small portion of it. The rest is taken by capitalists in the form of profit. This process, Marx said, leads to the concentration of wealth and the eventual downfall of the system. Marx's ideas had a huge influence on the world. The Russian Revolution in 1917, for instance, was heavily inspired by his writings. Lenin and the Bolsheviks sought to apply Marxism to create a communist society. But the result was far from Marx's vision, as the state gained more power instead of withering away. Marx's theories were revolutionary, but their implementation is what has caused so many debates. Some argue that Marx's ideas are still relevant, while others claim that they were doomed from the start. Either way, his vision for a classless society continues to inspire both supporters and critics. Chapter 3: Socialism in the Spotlight. Beyond free healthcare and welfare, socialism isn't just about free stuff, it's about fairness and equality. When people hear the word socialism, they often think of government-run healthcare and welfare. While those are important parts of the socialist agenda, there's so much more to it. Socialism, in its essence, is about reducing inequality. It seeks to ensure that wealth and resources are distributed in a way that benefits everyone, not just the wealthy few. This can mean anything from higher taxes on the rich to public ownership of key industries. In modern times, socialism can look quite different from the radical ideas Marx envisioned. Take democratic socialism, for example. It combines socialism's emphasis on economic equality with the democratic principles of free elections and civil liberties. Countries like Sweden, Norway, and Finland are often cited as examples of successful democratic socialist systems. But here's something interesting: even in capitalist countries, socialist policies have had a major impact. In the US, Social Security, unemployment insurance, and public education are all rooted in socialist ideas. These programs aim to provide a safety net for the most vulnerable members of society. Democratic socialism isn't just a European phenomenon, though. In the US, politicians like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez have reignited interest in socialist policies. Sanders has been particularly vocal about the need for free healthcare, higher wages, and wealth redistribution. Now, let's look at the economic side of socialism. One of the key arguments for socialism is that it helps prevent monopolies. In capitalist systems, a few big companies can dominate entire industries, driving up prices and stifling competition. Socialism aims to curb this by placing key industries in public hands. Here's a fascinating fact: studies show that countries with strong socialist policies tend to have higher levels of happiness and social well-being. For instance, Finland, which has a robust welfare system, consistently ranks as one of the happiest countries in the world. But socialism isn't just about the economy, it's about fairness. Socialists argue that a system where a few people control most of the wealth is unjust, no matter how much it benefits the economy. The goal is to create a society where everyone has a fair shot at success, regardless of their background. In some countries, socialism has been linked to strong environmental policies. Eco-socialism, for example, argues that we can't have a healthy planet without economic equality. It's about creating a green economy that benefits both people and the environment. While many associate socialism with state control, some versions advocate for decentralization and local decision-making. This form of socialism, known as anarchism, believes that power should be spread out among communities, not concentrated in a central government. Ultimately, socialism isn't just about how things are distributed, it's about changing the way people think about wealth and fairness. It challenges the idea that success should be measured solely by individual achievement and profit. Instead, it emphasizes cooperation and collective well-being. The question remains, can socialism work in today's world? It depends on who you ask. While some argue that it stifles innovation, others believe that it offers a fairer and more sustainable path forward. Regardless of where you stand, socialism has shaped modern society in ways we can't ignore. Chapter 4, The Red Dream, How Communism Became the Ultimate Utopia, or Dystopia. Communism has always been an ambitious dream, promising a world free from class divisions and inequality. But does this idealistic vision hold up when we look at history? To answer this, let's explore how communism became both a utopian dream and, for many, a dystopian reality. At the heart of communism is the idea of a classless society, where everyone has equal access to resources. This was Marx's ultimate goal, a world where private property didn't exist, and wealth was shared equally. It sounded simple and beautiful, but history tells a different story. The Soviet Union, led by Vladimir Lenin and later Joseph Stalin, was one of the first to attempt a communist state. Lenin's 1917 revolution promised a workers' paradise, but under Stalin, it turned into an authoritarian regime. Instead of a stateless society, the government grew stronger, exercising extreme control over its people. One of the most troubling aspects of communist regimes has been the concentration of power. In theory, communism removes hierarchies. But in practice, it often leads to a single-party dictatorship. Stalin's purges, the Great Leap Forward in China, and the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia are all examples of how communist governments became brutal, oppressive regimes. It's not just authoritarianism that plagues communism's history. Economic failures also played a significant role. The Soviet Union, for example, struggled with inefficiency and stagnation. Central planning, a hallmark of communist economies, often led to shortages and poor quality goods. In fact, it's estimated that the Soviet Union's economy was only half as productive as the United States in the 1980s. But it wasn't all bad news. Some of the communist regimes achieved impressive feats in areas like education and healthcare. Cuba, for example, has one of the highest literacy rates in the world, and its healthcare system is widely praised. These successes show that while communism often faltered in other areas, it could still deliver tangible benefits to the people. What about China? After Mao Zedong's death, China began moving away from traditional communist policies, adopting market reforms under Deng Xiaoping. These changes turned China into the world's second-largest economy, though the government still holds tight control over many aspects of society. This blend of communism with capitalism has become a defining characteristic of modern China. The question arises, can communism work in the 21st century? Some argue that the core ideas of communism, economic equality and fairness, are still relevant today, especially with growing inequality worldwide. However, history shows us that the path to communism is often paved with power struggles, economic hardship, and human rights abuses. The truth is, while communism remains a powerful idea in theory, its historical track record is marred by failure. Yet, many still believe that a true, ideal communist society is possible. The debate continues, but the reality is clear: communism, in practice, is a far cry from the utopia it once promised. Chapter 5, Capitalism versus Marxism, The Clash of Titans. Capitalism and Marxism are often seen as opposing forces, two systems that couldn't be more different. But what exactly is the clash between these two ideologies, and why has it sparked such intense debates for over 150 years? Capitalism is all about individual ownership and free markets. In this system, businesses and people compete to make profits, and the government's role is typically limited to protecting property rights and enforcing laws. The idea is that the competition will drive innovation and create wealth, benefiting society as a whole. However, capitalism is often criticized for concentrating wealth in the hands of a few, leading to inequality. Marxism, on the other hand, argues that capitalism is inherently exploitative. Marx believed that the wealth created by workers was unfairly taken by the capitalist class. In a capitalist system, workers are paid less than the value they create, with the difference being taken as profit by business owners. For Marx, this exploitation was a fundamental flaw of capitalism. Here's a striking fact. According to a 2023 Oxfam report, the world's richest 1% now own more than 45% of global wealth. This growing concentration of wealth is exactly what Marx warned about. Capitalism tends to reward those who already have capital, while leaving many workers behind. The tension between these two systems is not just about economics. It's also about human values. Capitalism champions individualism, where personal success is the ultimate goal. Marxism, on the other hand, focuses on collective well-being, arguing that true freedom can only be achieved when people are not exploited for their labor. This clash has played out in politics for decades. The Cold War was essentially a battle between capitalist America and communist Russia. The world was divided between these two systems, each claiming to offer the best path to prosperity and happiness. While the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, many argue that capitalism has its own set of problems, especially as wealth inequality continues to rise. One of the main criticisms of capitalism is that it leads to boom and bust cycles. The 2008 global financial crisis is a prime example. The crisis showed how unregulated markets can lead to catastrophic consequences, wiping out billions of dollars and leaving millions unemployed. Critics argue that capitalism prioritizes profit over people, which can lead to economic instability. On the other hand, supporters of capitalism argue that it creates wealth and opportunity. Capitalism incentivizes innovation, encourages entrepreneurship, and rewards hard work. Without the promise of profit, there would be little motivation to invent new technologies or start businesses. It's also worth noting that capitalism has lifted millions of people out of poverty. Since the 1990s, the global poverty rate has dropped by more than half, largely due to the spread of market-oriented policies. So, who wins this battle? It's not a simple answer. Both capitalism and Marxism have their strengths and weaknesses. Capitalism has delivered prosperity and innovation, but also inequality and instability. Marxism, in theory, offers a solution to these problems, but in practice, it has often led to authoritarianism and economic failure. The clash between capitalism and Marxism is far from over. In many ways, the world is still grappling with how to balance the two systems. Some argue for a middle ground, what's known as social democracy, where capitalism and socialism coexist to ensure economic growth while addressing inequality. Chapter 6, Modern Relevance. Can socialism, communism, or Marxism survive in 2024? In 2024, the world looks very different from the one Marx envisioned, but the questions he raised about inequality, justice, and power remain highly relevant. So, can socialism, communism, or Marxism survive in today's world? Let's explore. First, let's talk about socialism. In countries like Sweden, Norway, and Canada, socialist policies have not only survived but thrived. These nations have combined market economies with strong social safety nets, offering universal healthcare, free education, and generous unemployment benefits. They prove that socialism doesn't have to mean a lack of individual freedom or economic growth. In the US, socialism is making a comeback, particularly among younger generations. Politicians like Bernie Sanders have gained popularity by advocating for universal healthcare, student debt forgiveness, and higher taxes on the wealthy. This has led to a broader conversation about whether American capitalism is failing its citizens, especially when it comes to inequality. But what about communism? In practice, communism has largely failed in the way Marx envisioned. Most communist regimes have either collapsed or transformed into authoritarian governments. However, there's still interest in the idea of a stateless, classless society, especially in movements like anarchism, which advocates for a decentralized approach to communism. In China, the government has embraced a mix of communism and capitalism. The country's rapid economic growth in recent decades has been driven by market reforms, but the Communist Party still controls most aspects of life. This unique blend of capitalism and socialism has sparked debate about whether a Chinese model of communism could be the future. Marxism, as a philosophy, continues to inspire movements worldwide. From the labor movement to environmental activism, Marx's ideas about class struggle and economic justice resonate in many places. Some argue that Marx's analysis of capitalism is more relevant than ever, especially as wealth inequality reaches historic levels. Yet, the question remains, can Marxism, communism, or socialism survive in a globalized, capitalist world? The answer depends on how these ideologies evolve. In the 21st century, they are no longer about creating revolutions but about addressing the problems that capitalism has created. With the rise of wealth inequality, climate change, and political polarization, socialist and Marxist ideas are likely to remain at the forefront of political debates. In conclusion, while communism and Marxism may have faltered in the past, their core ideas still resonate today. Socialism, meanwhile, is thriving in many parts of the world. Whether these ideologies can adapt and thrive in a rapidly changing world remains to be seen, but their relevance is far from over.